Snow fell in heavy sheets across the Montana Valley the night Marcus Webb's in-laws threw him out. Christmas Eve, and the world had turned its back on him one final time. Or so he thought, because what his dog, Ranger, discovered buried beneath his grandfather's abandoned barn would reveal a secret kept hidden for 73 years. A secret that would change everything. The Greyhound bus hissed to a stop at the edge of Timber Falls, Montana, just after midnight on Christmas Eve. Marcus Webb sat in the back row, hands clasped between his knees, staring at nothing in particular. His duffel bag rested at his feet, everything he owned compressed into 40 pounds of canvas and regret. Beside him, Ranger lifted his head. The Belgian Malinois, scarred along his left shoulder from the same IED blast that had taken Marcus's hearing in one ear, pressed his nose against the cold window. His breath fogged the glass in small circles that faded and returned with each exhale. "End of the line, buddy," Marcus whispered, though his voice cracked on the last word. The bus driver, an older man with kind eyes, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this stop, son? Nothing out here but trees and snow." Marcus nodded, grabbing his bag. "It's where I need to be." The cold hit him like a fist when he stepped onto the frozen curb. Ranger jumped down beside him, immediately alert, ears forward, body tense. The town looked exactly as Marcus remembered from childhood visits. Small, quiet, dying slowly like so many rural places do. A single streetlight flickered near the closed general store. Christmas lights hung dark and forgotten from the eaves of the post office. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. Marcus stood there, alone except for Ranger, in a town that probably didn't remember him anymore. He pulled out the letter he'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The envelope was worn soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. His grandfather's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, stared back at him in the dim light. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The barn on the old property is yours now. Lawyer has the deed. It's not much, but it's something. Always meant to tell you more, but time ran out. Trust Ranger. Dogs see things we miss. Grandpa." That was it. No explanation. No mention of money or value. Just a barn on 20 acres of frozen Montana wilderness and a cryptic line about trusting his dog. Behind him, footsteps crunched through the snow. Marcus turned to see a sheriff's deputy approaching, hand resting casually on his belt. "Evening," the deputy said, eyeing Ranger with professional caution. "You just get in?" "Yes, sir. Got somewhere to stay tonight. Motels closed for the season." Marcus hesitated. "I inherited some property. The old Webb place, out past Sawyer Ridge." The deputy's expression shifted, something between surprise and concern. "Frank Webb's place." "My grandfather." A long pause. The deputy studied him more carefully now, taking in the worn jacket, the military bearing Marcus couldn't quite shake, the way Ranger stayed glued to his left side. "That property's been abandoned 15 years, the deputy said carefully. "No power, no heat. You sure you want to head out there tonight?" Marcus looked at Ranger, who stared back with unwavering confidence. "We've slept in worse places." The deputy seemed to debate something internally, then sighed. "All right, I can give you a ride out there, at least. Save you the walk." 20 minutes later, they turned onto a narrow dirt road, now buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating skeletal trees and forgotten fences. When the barn finally came into view, Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. It was bigger than he remembered. 2 stories, weathered gray wood, sagging slightly on one side, but still standing. The main house was gone, burned down years ago according to the lawyer's letter. But the barn remained, stubborn and alone against the mountain backdrop. "You sure about this?" the deputy asked one more time. Marcus opened the door. "I'm sure." Ranger jumped out, immediately circling the perimeter, nose to the ground. Marcus shouldered his duffel and approached the barn. The deputy waited until Marcus had forced open the frozen side door before driving away, taillights fading into the storm. Inside, the barn was dark and cold, but it was shelter. Marcus flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through decades of dust. Old stalls lined one wall. Rusted farm equipment sat frozen in time. The smell of aged wood and forgotten hay filled his lungs. He found a relatively clean corner, spread out his sleeping bag, and sat down heavily. Exhaustion crashed over him in waves. The last 3 months played through his mind in painful flashes. His wife Sarah's face when she told him she couldn't do this anymore. Her parents' cold satisfaction when they'd packed his things on Christmas Eve, their daughter nodding silently as they removed him from the home he'd thought was his. Too broken, her father had said, not even trying to lower his voice. Can't hold a job, can't get over whatever happened over there. Sarah deserves better. And Sarah hadn't argued. Ranger pressed against his side, warm and solid. Marcus wrapped an arm around the dog's neck, pressing his face into the thick fur. "Just you and me now, boy," he whispered. Ranger licked his hand once, then settled beside him, head resting on Marcus's thigh. The wind howled outside. Snow tapped against the barn walls. Christmas Eve in Montana, broke and alone except for a dog who'd saved his life more times than he could count. Marcus closed his eyes, trying not to think about Sarah opening presents with her parents tomorrow morning, trying not to wonder if she'd miss him at all. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the usual nightmares. Explosions, dust, screaming. But every time he jerked awake, Ranger was there, pressing close, grounding him back to reality. When morning light finally crept through the cracks in the barn walls, Marcus woke to find Ranger standing at the far end of the barn, staring intently at something Marcus couldn't see. "What is it, boy?" Ranger didn't turn. He just kept staring, ears forward, tail stiff. Marcus pushed himself up, joints protesting the cold and the hard ground. He walked over to where Ranger stood. The dog was focused on the back wall, specifically a section of old wooden planks that looked exactly like every other section. "There's nothing there, Ranger." But Ranger disagreed. He moved closer, sniffing along the base of the wall, then scratched at one particular board. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he looked back at Marcus as if to say, "Pay attention." Marcus crouched down, running his hand along the boards Ranger had indicated. They felt solid, but when he tapped them, the sound was different. Hollow. His pulse quickened. He found a rusted crowbar in the corner and returned to the wall. Ranger stepped back, watching intently as Marcus wedged the crowbar between the boards and pulled. The wood groaned, protested, then gave way with a sharp crack. Cold air rushed out from the opening, carrying the scent of earth and metal and something older. Something that had been sealed away for a very long time. Marcus pulled away more boards, creating an opening large enough to see through. His flashlight revealed a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, descending into darkness. "What the hell, Grandpa?" Marcus breathed. Ranger barked once, sharp and insistent. Then, before Marcus could stop him, the dog squeezed through the opening and disappeared into the dark. "Ranger, wait." Marcus had no choice but to follow. The passage was tight, claustrophobic, angling downward at a steep grade. Marcus had to turn sideways in places, his breathing coming faster as old memories of confined spaces threatened to surface. But ahead, he could hear Ranger's claws clicking on stone, moving with purpose. The passage opened suddenly into a larger space. Marcus emerged, gasping, and swept his flashlight around. He was standing in an underground chamber, roughly 15 feet square, supported by thick wooden beams. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked carefully and marked with dates. Every single crate was dated 1950. Marcus moved closer, hands shaking as he pried open the nearest crate. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth that crackled with age, were gold bars. Actual gold bars, stamped with official-looking seals. He opened another crate. More gold. Another. Stacks of bearer bonds, vacuum-sealed in plastic that looked far more modern than 1950. His legs gave out. He sat down hard on the cold stone floor, Ranger pressing against him immediately. "What did you do, Grandpa?" he whispered into the silence. There was a metal box on one of the shelves, separate from the crates. Marcus reached for it with trembling hands. Inside was a journal, leather-bound and well-preserved, along with a sealed envelope with his name on it. He broke the seal, unfolded the letter. His grandfather's handwriting, stronger here than in the letter that had brought him to Montana. "Marcus, if you're reading this, you found what I spent 60 years protecting. I need you to understand, I didn't steal this. After the war, I worked for people who needed assets moved, protected, kept away from those who would misuse them. This was my assignment. My life's work. When they all died and the agency that hired me was dissolved, I became the last guardian. I couldn't tell anyone. Not your grandmother, not your mother, not you. The secret would have put you all in danger. So I waited. Waited for the right person, the right time. You're a good man, Marcus. Better than you think. The world hasn't been kind to you, I know. But you have something most men don't. Honor, integrity, and a dog who would die for you. That makes you worthy of this. Inside this chamber is approximately $305 million in gold, bonds, and certificates. It's real, it's legal, and it's yours. But son, I need you to listen carefully. There are people who would kill for this if they knew it existed. Keep it quiet. Use Bradford & Sons Legal in Helena. They have my will and instructions. Trust them. Trust Ranger. And trust yourself. You're going to be okay now. Grandpa. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each time hoping the words would change, that he'd misunderstood. But they stayed the same. $305 million. Sealed since 1950. His. He looked at Ranger, who sat calmly, as if discovering a fortune was just another day's work. You knew, didn't you? Marcus whispered. Somehow you knew. Ranger's tail swept the floor once. Marcus stood on shaking legs. He needed to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. But first, he needed to seal this chamber back up and make sure no one else stumbled onto it. It took him 2 hours to carefully replace the boards, to make the wall look undisturbed again. He moved old equipment in front of it for good measure. Then he and Ranger walked the property in the gray Christmas morning light. 20 acres of snow-covered land. A barn that needed work but was structurally sound. Mountains in the distance. Silence broken only by wind and the occasional bird call. For the first time in months, Marcus felt something other than despair. He felt possibility. His phone buzzed, one of the few things his in-laws had let him keep. A text from Sarah. Hope you found somewhere to stay. Parents wanted me to tell you we need the truck back. Can you have it dropped off by next week? Not Merry Christmas. Not are you okay? Just a request for the truck. Marcus looked at the barn, at the secret buried beneath it, at Ranger sitting patiently beside him. He typed back, keep the truck. I won't need it. Then he silenced his phone and slipped it into his pocket. The old Marcus Webb, the one who'd let people walk over him, who'd absorbed every insult and rejection without fighting back, was gone. Buried under the same snow that covered his grandfather's land. What rose in his place was someone harder. Someone who'd survived war, betrayal, and abandonment. Someone who now had the resources to rebuild his life exactly as he wanted it. Marcus looked down at Ranger. Merry Christmas, boy. Things are about to get interesting. Ranger barked once, sharp and certain. And somewhere in the distance, church bells rang out across the frozen valley, marking the beginning of something neither Marcus nor his former family could have anticipated. The day after Christmas dawned clear and bitterly cold. Marcus woke early, his mind already racing with plans despite having slept fitfully on the barn floor. Ranger stirred beside him, stretching before padding to the door and waiting expectantly. Yeah, all right, Marcus muttered, pushing himself up. His body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, but it was nothing compared to the aches he'd learned to live with. Physical pain had become background noise. He let Ranger out to do his business, then stood in the barn doorway watching his breath fog in the morning air. The property looked different in daylight. Less abandoned, more full of potential. The land rolled gently toward a tree line of pines and aspens. An old access road wound through the snow toward what used to be the main house. His phone buzzed. Marcus pulled it out, expecting another message from Sarah about things she wanted him to return. Instead, it was from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Webb, this is Catherine Bradford from Bradford & Sons Legal in Helena. Your grandfather named you as heir to his estate. We need to meet at your earliest convenience to finalize paperwork. Can you come to our office? Marcus stared at the message. So it was real. All of it. He typed back quickly. Can be there today if that works. The response came within minutes. 2 p.m. Address below. Please bring identification. Ranger returned from his exploration, snow dusting his dark coat. He shook vigorously, then sat at Marcus's feet, looking up expectantly. Looks like we've got a meeting, boy. The drive to Helena took 2 hours. Marcus had borrowed a truck from the sheriff's deputy who'd given him a ride to the property, promising to return it that evening. The roads were clear enough, and Ranger sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape roll past with alert interest. Bradford & Sons Legal occupied a restored Victorian building in downtown Helena. Marcus parked on the street, gathered the documents his grandfather had mentioned, and headed inside with Ranger at his heel. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, smiled when she saw them. Mr. Webb, Ms. Bradford is expecting you. And who's this handsome fellow? Ranger. He's a service dog. Of course. Right this way. Catherine Bradford was younger than Marcus expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Her office was lined with law books and family photos. She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. Mr. Webb, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. Marcus settled into the chair, Ranger lying at his feet. Thank you. I didn't know him as well as I should have. He spoke of you often. Catherine pulled out a thick folder. Frank Webb was a client of this firm for 43 years. He was very specific about his wishes regarding his estate, and very specific about who should inherit. She slid a document across the desk. This is the deed to the 20 acres in Timber Falls, along with all structures. It's been transferred to your name free and clear. No mortgage, no liens. Marcus nodded slowly, processing. There's also this. She handed him a sealed envelope, identical to the one he'd found in the underground chamber. He instructed me to give this to you only after you'd visited the property. I assume you've been there. I spent last night in the barn. Then you know about the chamber. Marcus's heart skipped. You know? Catherine's expression was carefully neutral. I know that Frank Webb was a man of many secrets, and that he trusted very few people. I know he worked for the government in a capacity that was never fully explained. And I know that whatever he left you, he wanted protected at all costs. She leaned forward. Mr. Webb, Marcus, I don't need to know details. But I need to know if you want this firm's help managing what you've inherited. We have resources for this kind of situation. Discretion is our specialty. Marcus studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or greed. He found only professional competence and something that looked like genuine concern. What kind of help are we talking about? Quiet liquidation of assets, tax management, trust establishment, security consulting, whatever you need to turn inheritance into sustainable wealth without drawing attention. Marcus thought of the $305 million sitting in an underground chamber beneath a forgotten barn. Thought of Sarah and her parents, who'd thrown him out like trash. Thought of all the people who'd looked at him with pity or disgust when they learned he was a veteran struggling with PTSD. I want to disappear for a while, he said quietly. I want time to figure things out without anyone knowing I've inherited anything. We can arrange that. Catherine made a note. Do you have somewhere to stay while we sort out the details? The barn. She looked up sharply. In winter? Marcus, that's not safe. It's mine. And it's safer than you'd think. Ranger lifted his head, as if agreeing. Catherine sighed. At least let me arrange for a generator and some space heaters. You can't live without power in Montana winter. Marcus considered arguing, then nodded. All right, that would help. They spent the next hour going over paperwork. Catherine explained that his grandfather had been meticulous about documentation. Every item in the chamber had a paper trail proving its legitimacy. The gold bars had been purchased legally through government contracts. The bearer bonds had been issued through proper channels. Frank Webb had been the custodian of wealth that technically belonged to a defunct intelligence agency, but with no one left to claim it, it defaulted to his heir. It's complicated, Catherine admitted, but it's legal, and with the right management, you'll never have to worry about money again. As they wrapped up, she asked, is there anyone we should notify about this inheritance? Family members who might have questions. Marcus thought of Sarah and her parents. Thought of the satisfaction on their faces when they'd packed his belongings. Thought of every time they'd made him feel worthless. No, he said firmly. No one needs to know. Catherine studied him for a moment, then nodded. Understood. We'll keep everything confidential. Marcus left the office 2 hours later with copies of all the documents, a plan for starting the asset liquidation process, and a quiet sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. On the drive back to Timber Falls, Ranger dozed in the passenger seat. Marcus's mind churned with possibilities. The money changed everything, but it also complicated everything. He couldn't just deposit $305 million in a bank account. Even with Catherine's help, the process would take time, strategy, careful planning. But for now, he had a roof over his head, a purpose, and freedom from the people who discarded him. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah. Your mail is still coming here. What do you want me to do with it? Marcus almost laughed. Of all the things to worry about, she was concerned about his mail. He typed back, Forward it to Bradford and Sons Legal, Helena. Address online. A long pause. Then, why do you have mail going to a law office? Marcus smiled grimly. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. Grandfather's estate business. Nothing you need to worry about. He could almost feel her curiosity through the phone, could imagine her telling her parents, could picture their calculating expressions as they tried to figure out if Frank Webb had left anything valuable. Good. Let them think. Let them scramble for information they'd never get. When Marcus arrived back at the barn, he found that Catherine had already made arrangements. A generator sat near the entrance, still in its packaging, along with 3 industrial space heaters, a camping stove, and boxes of food supplies. A note was attached. Consider this a retainer on our services. You shouldn't freeze while we sort out your grandfather's affairs. CB. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at the supplies. When was the last time someone had done something kind for him without expecting anything in return? He couldn't remember. Ranger barked once, bringing him back to the present. Yeah, Marcus said, shaking off the emotion. Let's get this stuff inside. By nightfall, he had the generator running and 2 space heaters warming the barn to a temperature that didn't require seeing his breath. He cooked a simple meal on the camping stove, canned soup and crackers, and shared pieces of jerky with Ranger. As he sat in the warmth, back against the barn wall, Ranger's head resting on his knee, Marcus felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a man with nothing, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd been given a second chance and intended to make it count. His phone buzzed one more time. Sarah again. Mom wants to know if your grandfather left you anything significant. Marcus read the message 3 times. The audacity of it was almost impressive. They'd thrown him out on Christmas Eve, and now they wanted to know if he'd inherited money. He deleted the message without responding. Some questions didn't deserve answers. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the barn and the land and the secret buried beneath. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Ranger's warmth, hearing the generator's steady hum, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Catherine's firm moved with impressive efficiency, sending contractors to install proper insulation in the barn, running temporary power lines, and setting up a small but functional living space in what used to be the hay loft. Marcus spent most of his time down in the hidden chamber, carefully cataloging everything with Catherine's guidance over phone calls. Each crate was photographed, each item documented. The scope of his grandfather's secret grew with every inventory sheet. Gold bars, 347, each one stamped with official government seals from 1949 to 1950. Bearer bonds, $87 million face value, many matured, all negotiable. Certificates for silver, platinum, and other precious metals stored in secure facilities his grandfather had never cashed in. And at the very back of the chamber, behind a false wall Ranger had somehow sensed, Marcus found something even more stunning. Intelligence documents from the early Cold War, detailing operations that had never been declassified. Don't touch those, Catherine warned when he called her. Those need to be handled by federal authorities. But Marcus, this proves your grandfather was exactly who he claimed to be in his letter. He wasn't a thief. He was a guardian. What do I do with them? We'll arrange a meeting with the appropriate agencies. Off the record, confidential. But those documents need to be returned to government custody. And in exchange? Catherine's smile was evident even over the phone. In exchange, they'll ensure no one ever questions the legitimacy of your inheritance. It's the best insurance policy you could ask for. On the 4th morning, Marcus woke to find fresh snow covering the property and a text from Catherine. 3 men arriving today at noon. Federal agents, vetted and cleared. They'll handle the documents. Trust them. Marcus spent the morning preparing. He moved the intelligence files to a separate container, sealed the main chamber, and waited. At exactly noon, an unmarked black SUV pulled up to the barn. 3 men emerged, all wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military precision. The lead agent, a man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes, approached with his credentials out. Marcus Webb, I'm Agent Dawson, Department of Defense. We understand you found some items that belong to us. Marcus gestured them inside. Ranger stayed close, evaluating each man with professional interest but no aggression. The meeting took 3 hours. Marcus showed them the documents, explained how he'd discovered the chamber, and answered their questions with careful honesty. The agents photographed everything, made extensive notes, and treated the documents with reverent care. "Your grandfather was a legend," Dawson said quietly as they prepared to leave. "Most of his work is still classified, but I can tell you that he saved countless lives. What he protected here, this could have sparked another war if it had fallen into the wrong hands in the 1950s. Why didn't he turn it over when the agency dissolved?" Dawson exchanged glances with his colleagues. Because by then, no one knew what to do with it. The operations were too sensitive, the money too complicated to trace. Frank made a judgment call. Keep it hidden until someone trustworthy could handle it properly. Looks like he chose well. After they left, taking the intelligence documents, but leaving everything else, Marcus sat down heavily on a hay bale. Ranger pressed against his legs. "We did the right thing," Marcus told the dog. "Grandpa would approve." His phone rang. "Catherine, the agents called me already," she said. "Congratulations, Marcus. You just made yourself bulletproof. They're filing paperwork that officially closes several Cold War-era cases and clears your grandfather's name. More importantly, they're ensuring the IRS will have no questions about your inheritance. So the money is really mine. The money is really yours. We can start the liquidation process immediately. I'm thinking we set up 3 trusts. One for immediate living expenses, one for long-term investments, and one for charitable purposes if you're interested." Marcus thought about all the veterans he'd met who were struggling like he had been. Thought about families torn apart by PTSD and unemployment and the weight of serving a country that often forgot its warriors. "Yeah," he said. "I'm interested in the charitable trust." "Good. I'll draw up the papers." After hanging up, Marcus walked outside. The afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. He could see for miles from this property, mountains, forests, sky so big it made problems feel smaller. His phone buzzed. "Sarah, again. Your mother-in-law is asking about your grandfather's estate. She says we have a right to know since we supported you for so long." Marcus stared at the message, anger flaring hot in his chest. They'd kicked him out in the middle of winter and now claimed they'd supported him? He typed slowly, choosing each word with care. "Tell your mother I said she has no rights to any information about my family or my inheritance. And for the record, paying for 3 months of groceries isn't supporting someone. It's basic decency, which is apparently a foreign concept to your family." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came within seconds. "That's incredibly rude. After everything we did for you." Marcus laughed, the sound bitter in the cold air. He typed, "You threw me out on Christmas Eve. You told me I was too broken to deserve your daughter. You looked at me like I was garbage. And now you want to know if I inherited money? Here's what you get from me. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Don't contact me again." He blocked the number before she could respond. Then, on impulse, he blocked Sarah's number too. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The last threads connecting him to that chapter of his life were severed. He was free. Ranger barked, chasing a rabbit through the snow, and Marcus found himself smiling. Really smiling, not the forced expression he'd worn for so long, but genuine amusement at his dog's enthusiasm. "Come on, boy," he called. "Let's go see what else Grandpa left us." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property. Marcus found the remnants of the old house foundation, overgrown but still visible. Found a stream that had frozen solid, winding through the pines. Found a spot on a hill where the view was so perfect it made his chest ache. This was his land, his inheritance, his fresh start. And no one, not Sarah, not her parents, not anyone from his old life, could take it away. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus stood on that hill with Ranger beside him and made a promise to himself and to his grandfather's memory. He would be worthy of this gift. He would build something meaningful. He would help others the way he wished someone had helped him. And he would never, ever let anyone make him feel worthless again. The Montana wind carried his breath away into the twilight, and Marcus Webb walked back to his barn feeling more at home than he had in years. By the end of the first week, Marcus had settled into a routine. Mornings were spent working with Catherine's team to liquidate assets carefully and legally. Afternoons belonged to the property, clearing brush, repairing fence lines, and planning improvements. Evenings were quiet, just him and Ranger, sometimes reading his grandfather's journals by lamplight. The journals revealed a man Marcus wished he'd known better. Frank Webb had been a soldier first, then an intelligence operative, then a guardian of secrets that could have toppled governments. But through it all, he'd been thoughtful, principled, and surprisingly funny. His entries were filled with dry observations about bureaucracy, warm memories of Marcus's grandmother, and careful documentation of every decision he'd made regarding the hidden fortune. March 15, 1987. Still no contact from the department. I think they've genuinely forgotten this exists. Starting to wonder if Marcus will be the one to inherit this mess. He's only 5 now, but he's got his grandmother's eyes and, I hope, my sense of right and wrong. If you're reading this, kid, I'm sorry for the burden. But I trust you. Marcus traced his fingers over the words, emotion thick in his throat. His grandfather had been planning this for 30 years, carefully ensuring everything would be legal and protected when the time came. On the 8th day, Marcus woke to his phone ringing. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Marcus Webb. A man's voice, cultured and cold. Who's asking? My name is Douglas Whitmore. I'm an attorney representing the Kensington family. Marcus sat up straight, suddenly alert. The Kensingtons were Sarah's parents. I have nothing to say to them. Please, hear me out. The Kensingtons are concerned about your well-being. They feel perhaps there were some misunderstandings during your separation from Sarah, and they'd like to make amends. Misunderstandings. Marcus's laugh was harsh. They threw me out on Christmas Eve. What's to misunderstand? Emotions were high. They reacted poorly. But Mr. Kensington particularly would like to extend an olive branch. Perhaps meet for coffee to discuss. No. Mr. Webb. I said no. They made their position clear. I'm not interested in reconciliation or discussion or whatever this is. A pause. Then Whitmore's voice turned sharper. Mr. Webb, the Kensingtons are aware you've come into some inheritance. They feel, given the support they provided during your marriage, that certain conversations about asset division would be appropriate. There it was. The real reason for the call. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. I was married to Sarah for 2 years. We separated before any inheritance occurred. They have no legal claim to anything. Perhaps not legally, but morally. Don't talk to me about morality. They looked me in the eye and told me I was too damaged to be part of their family. Now they want money? Tell the Kensingtons to go to hell. And don't call me again. He hung up, hands shaking with anger. Ranger immediately pressed close, sensing his agitation. Marcus stood, pacing the barn. Of course they'd heard about the inheritance somehow. Small town, and probably someone at the lawyer's office had let something slip. Now they were circling back, hoping to guilt him into sharing. His phone rang again. Same number. Marcus answered with barely controlled fury. I told you. Mr. Webb, please don't hang up. Whitmore's tone had shifted to something harder. The Kensingtons are prepared to file legal action if necessary. Claims of undue influence. Questions about your grandfather's mental competence when he arranged the inheritance. Concerns about a vulnerable veteran being taken advantage of by unscrupulous lawyers. Marcus went very still. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining the reality of the situation. The Kensingtons have resources. They have connections. And they have genuine concerns that need to be addressed. A simple meeting to discuss a reasonable settlement would avoid considerable unpleasantness for everyone. A settlement. A gesture of good faith. Recognition of the support they provided. Perhaps 20% of the inheritance would be. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. 20%? Of money they have no legal right to? You're insane. Mr. Webb, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The Kensingtons are not people you want as enemies. Tell them to do their worst. And tell them something else. Every penny of my grandfather's estate was earned legally, documented thoroughly, and cleared by federal authorities. If they want to drag this into court, I'll make sure everyone knows they're attacking a disabled veteran who inherited his grandfather's life savings. We'll see how that plays in the media. He hung up and immediately called Catherine. She answered on the first ring, already aware. Let me guess. Someone named Whitmore just called you. How did you know? He called here first, fishing for information. I told him nothing and sent him packing. Marcus, this is exactly the kind of thing we prepared for. Don't engage with him. Don't respond to any more calls. Let me handle it. They're threatening legal action. Let them try. Your grandfather's estate is bulletproof. We have documentation going back 70 years. We have federal clearance. And we have the fact that you and Sarah were separated before you even knew about the inheritance. They have nothing except bluster and greed. Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly. I just want them to leave me alone. They will. Trust me. People like the Kensingtons are bullies. They pick on targets they think won't fight back. But once they realize you have proper legal representation and aren't intimidated, they'll move on to easier prey. After hanging up, Marcus walked outside into the cold morning. Ranger followed, matching his pace step for step. They climbed the hill behind the barn, the same spot where Marcus had made his promises to himself a week ago. The valley spread out below, peaceful and white. No cars, no voices, no lawyers or greedy in-laws. Just Montana wilderness and the wind through the pines. They're not going to ruin this, Marcus told Ranger quietly. Grandpa left this to me for a reason. I'm not letting them take it. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid and unquestioningly loyal. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Sarah. Please call off your lawyer. My parents are just worried about you. This doesn't have to be ugly. He stared at the message, recognizing the manipulation. Sarah had always been good at that, making herself sound reasonable while enabling her parents' behavior. He typed back, Your parents aren't worried about me. They're worried they might miss out on money. Tell them I have excellent legal representation and they're wasting their time. Don't contact me again. Before she could respond, he blocked this number too. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stood on the hill, breathing cold air, feeling the weight of the past week settling into something solid and real. He was done being the victim, done being the one people pushed around, done apologizing for surviving. Frank Webb had given him more than money. He'd given him power, security, and the means to rebuild his life on his own terms. And Marcus intended to use every bit of it. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. The Kensingtons hired investigators who showed up in Timber Falls, asking questions about Marcus and his grandfather. They filed a preliminary lawsuit claiming emotional distress and financial dependency. They contacted veterans organizations, painting themselves as concerned family members worried about a disturbed veteran who'd come into dangerous wealth. Catherine handled it all with ruthless efficiency. She released carefully worded statements about Frank Webb's documented government service. She provided evidence of the Kensingtons' actions on Christmas Eve, including testimony from the sheriff's deputy who'd driven Marcus to the property. She filed countersuits for harassment and defamation. The tide turned when Agent Dawson from the Department of Defense submitted a sealed affidavit to the court, confirming the legitimacy of Frank Webb's work and Marcus's inheritance. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, took one look at the documentation and dismissed the Kensingtons' lawsuit with prejudice. This court will not tolerate attempts to exploit military service members or their families, he stated from the bench. Case dismissed. The plaintiffs are ordered to pay defendants legal fees. And if they attempt to refile, I will consider sanctions for frivolous litigation. Catherine called Marcus with the news. It's over. They can't touch you. Marcus sat down heavily, relief washing over him. Thank you. Thank your grandfather. He set this up so perfectly that there was never any real danger. But Marcus? This taught the Kensingtons that you're not someone they can push around. Don't expect to hear from them again. She was right. The call stopped. The investigators left town. Sarah sent one final text. I'm sorry it came to this, which Marcus deleted without responding. The noise faded, leaving him in peace. It was during this quiet that Marcus started to notice something odd. Ranger had developed a new behavior. Every morning, the dog would trot to the same spot on the property, about 50 yards from the barn, and dig. Not frantically, but deliberately, as if searching for something specific. What are you after, boy? Marcus asked one morning, following Ranger to the spot. The dog barked once, then continued digging through the snow and frozen earth. Marcus grabbed a shovel and helped. 3 feet down, his blade struck something solid. Metal. Together, they uncovered an old military-style storage container, sealed with what looked like welding. Marcus pried it open carefully, revealing another cache of items his grandfather had hidden. This one was different. No gold, no bonds. Instead, he found personal items, photographs of Frank Webb in military uniform, standing with men Marcus didn't recognize. Letters between Frank and someone named Colonel Hayes, Marcus's great-grandfather, apparently, and a small leather-bound book with a single word embossed on the cover. Continuation. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside, his grandfather's handwriting. If you found this, Marcus, it means Ranger is as smart as I thought he was. Good dog. The main inheritance will set you up financially. But this is for your soul. I've bought land adjacent to your 20 acres. Another 80 acres, hidden in a trust, released to you automatically 1 year after my death. By the time you read this, it should be yours. Build something there. A place for men like you. Veterans who've lost their way, who need time and space to heal. Use the money wisely, but use the land generously. That's the real inheritance. Marcus looked up from the journal, tears blurring his vision. Ranger sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, proud of his discovery. 80 more acres. Marcus whispered, Grandpa, what are you trying to do to me? But he knew. Frank Webb had spent his entire life protecting things, secrets, assets, people. Now, from beyond the grave, he was protecting Marcus by giving him purpose, direction, and the resources to help others. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Catherine. Did you know about additional property? Oh. Catherine's voice was warm. You found the continuation cache. Yes, the adjacent land transferred to you automatically last month. I was waiting for you to discover it. Your grandfather was very specific about the timing. What am I supposed to do with 100 acres in Montana? Whatever you want, Marcus. But I'd suggest you visit the property. Frank left something there too. Something I think you'll appreciate. The next morning, Marcus and Ranger hiked through the snow to the eastern boundary of his property. Where his 20 acres ended, a gate stood, new and well-maintained despite the remote location. Beyond it, the land opened into a natural valley sheltered by pine forests and rock outcroppings. And in the center of that valley sat a structure that made Marcus's breath catch. A lodge, not huge, but beautifully crafted from logs and stone, with a wide porch and large windows that caught the morning light. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone had been maintaining it. Marcus approached slowly, Ranger trotting ahead to investigate. The front door was unlocked. Inside, he found a space that was part cabin, part retreat center. 6 bedrooms, each simple but comfortable. A large common room with a fireplace. A kitchen designed for feeding groups. And everywhere, touches that showed his grandfather's hand. Carefully chosen furniture, artwork depicting Montana landscapes, bookshelves filled with titles on trauma recovery, meditation, and healing. On the mantel, a framed photograph, Frank Webb standing in front of this very lodge, looking pleased with himself. Below it, another letter. Welcome home, Marcus. To the real home I meant for you to have. I built this over the last 10 years of my life, quietly, with cash and contractors who knew how to keep secrets. It's for you, but it's also for others who need what you needed. I've set up an endowment to cover operating costs for 50 years. Enough to run this place as a refuge for veterans who need time away from the world. You can manage it however you want, or hand management to someone else if it's too much. But I hope you'll see this as your calling. You know what it's like to have nowhere to go, no one who understands. Make sure others never have to feel that way. I'm proud of you, kid. Always have been. Marcus sank into one of the leather chairs, the letter trembling in his hands. Ranger jumped up beside him, resting his head on Marcus's knee, and for the first time since his grandfather's death, Marcus let himself cry. Not from grief, from overwhelming gratitude. Frank Webb had seen him, really seen him, had understood what Marcus would need before Marcus himself knew, had built an entire future around giving Marcus purpose, community, and a way to transform his pain into something meaningful. When the tears finally stopped, Marcus stood and walked through the lodge, really looking at it, imagining it filled with veterans like himself, men and women trying to find their footing again, imagining Ranger and maybe other service dogs, helping guide people back to themselves. He pulled out his phone and called Catherine. I want to open it, he said without preamble. The lodge. I want to make it work. I was hoping you'd say that. Your grandfather left detailed operating plans. I can send them over. How long will it take to get started? If you're serious, we could have our first guests by spring. There's already a wait list. A wait list. Frank started it years ago. Word spread quietly through veterans networks about a place that might open someday. People have been hoping. Marcus looked around the lodge again, seeing it with new eyes. Not just a building, but a lifeline. A place where broken things could begin to mend. Let's do it, he said firmly. Let's open Frank Webb's final mission. Ranger barked once, approval clear in the sound. And in that moment, standing in the lodge his grandfather had built, Marcus Webb finally understood. He hadn't inherited a fortune. He'd inherited a calling, and he intended to honor it. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Catherine's firm handled the legal framework, establishing the Webb Veterans Refuge as a nonprofit organization with Marcus as director. The endowment his grandfather had created would cover operating expenses, but Marcus added his own funds to expand services, therapy programs, job training, wilderness activities designed for healing. He hired carefully. A retired combat medic became the health coordinator. A psychologist who specialized in PTSD offered to work part-time. A chef who'd served in the Marines took over the kitchen. Each person Marcus brought on was someone who understood the mission viscerally, not academically. By March, the lodge was ready. Marcus stood on the porch as the first van arrived, carrying 6 veterans from across the country. They emerged slowly, cautiously, the way people who'd been disappointed too many times always did. Marcus met them at the door with Ranger at his side. "Welcome," he said simply. "This is a place to rest. No judgment, no pressure. Stay as long as you need." A woman in her 30s, army patch still visible on her worn jacket, studied him carefully. "How much does it cost?" "Nothing. Food, lodging, all the programs. It's covered." "Why?" Marcus smiled, the expression no longer strange on his face. "Because my grandfather believed veterans shouldn't have to fight alone. And because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." He stepped aside, gesturing them in. Ranger moved among them, allowing pets and scratches, his gentle presence already beginning the work of healing. Over dinner that first night, Marcus told them about Frank Webb, about the secret fortune, the hidden lodge, the meticulous planning that had gone into creating this place. He was honest about his own struggles, his failed marriage, the night he'd arrived at an abandoned barn with nothing but a dog and desperation. "This place isn't magic," he said, looking around the table at faces marked by war and hardship. "It won't fix everything, but it's a start, a place to breathe, to remember you're more than what happened to you." The weeks turned into months. Some veterans stayed a few days, some a few weeks. A handful asked to stay longer, helping with operations in exchange for extended residence. The lodge developed a rhythm: morning group sessions, afternoon activities, evening meals shared around the long wooden table. And slowly, Marcus watched transformations happen, saw shoulders unbend, saw smiles become more frequent, saw people begin to sleep through the night without screaming. Ranger was the unofficial therapist, moving from person to person with uncanny intuition about who needed comfort most. Marcus sometimes wondered if his grandfather had known how crucial the dog would be, if Frank had understood that Ranger was the true heart of the refuge. In June, Marcus got a letter. Not email, not text, an actual handwritten letter in the mail. He opened it carefully, recognizing the handwriting with a jolt. "Sarah, Marcus, I know I have no right to contact you, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I've spent 6 months thinking about what we did to you. What I did. How I let my parents convince me you were the problem, when really, I just didn't know how to help. I was scared and overwhelmed, and instead of fighting for us, I took the easy way out. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed to tell you I see now how wrong we were. My parents are still convinced they did the right thing, but I know better. I hope you're okay. I hope you found peace. Sarah." Marcus read the letter twice, then set it aside. He felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just distant acknowledgement that she'd written. He didn't respond. What would be the point? That part of his life was over, the door closed and locked. Sarah was a stranger now, someone he used to know. Instead, he walked outside where Ranger was playing with 2 of the residents, their laughter carrying across the valley. Marcus watched them, feeling contentment settle deep in his chest. This was his life now. This refuge, these veterans, this purpose his grandfather had seen in him before Marcus had seen it himself. In September, Catherine called with news. "The last of the assets have been liquidated and properly invested. Your net worth is approximately $287 million after taxes, legal fees, and the charitable endowment. Marcus, you're never going to have to worry about money again. How much is going to the refuge annually? $5 million from the endowment, plus whatever you choose to add personally." Marcus did quick math. "What if we doubled it? Could we open a second location?" Catherine laughed. "You could open 10 locations if you wanted, but maybe perfect one first." "Good point." He hung up and looked around the lodge. Autumn was painting the mountains in gold and crimson. The refuge had hosted 43 veterans so far, with 15 currently in residence. 3 had found jobs and housing and moved on. 2 had decided to stay as permanent staff. All of them had found something they'd lost. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from the Army medic who served as health coordinator. New arrival asking for you specifically. Says she heard about this place from a friend. Name's Jennifer Hartley, Marine Corps. Marcus headed to the main entrance, Ranger falling into step beside him. A woman stood by the door, pack at her feet, looking around with the same cautious hope Marcus had seen in every arrival. Jennifer? He asked gently. She nodded. People call me Hart. I heard this was a place where it's okay to still be fighting even though the war is over. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Yeah, it is. Can I stay? As long as you need. Her shoulders sagged with relief, so profound Marcus had to look away for a moment. Ranger moved forward, offering himself for a pet, and Hart dropped to her knees, hugging the dog and crying into his fur. Marcus gave her space, remembering his own first night in the barn, remembering how Ranger's presence had been the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Later that evening, after Hart had settled into her room and joined the group for dinner, Marcus stood on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The same mountains his grandfather had looked at for years while building this place in secret, while protecting a fortune that would eventually become a lifeline. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Webb, this is Douglas Whitmore. The Kensingtons want you to know they're expecting a grandchild. Sarah is pregnant. They thought you'd want to know. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he blocked the number and deleted the text. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. Sarah had moved on. Her parents were still trying to manipulate him. But they had no power here, in this place his grandfather had created. Ranger pressed against his leg, and Marcus rested a hand on the dog's head. Just you and me, boy, he murmured. Building something that matters. Ranger's tail swept across the porch, and somewhere inside the lodge, someone laughed, a real, genuine laugh that spoke of healing. Marcus smiled and walked back inside, leaving the past where it belonged, behind him, fading into Montana twilight while the future, bright and full of purpose, waited in the warmth of the lodge. Winter returned to Montana, and with it came the anniversary of the worst night of Marcus's life. December 23rd, 1 year since the Kensingtons had thrown him out. He stood in the same spot where he'd first arrived, looking at the barn that had become the center of something far bigger than himself. The refuge was thriving. 22 veterans currently in residence, a waiting list of 50 more, and partnerships forming with VA facilities across the country. But tonight, alone except for Ranger, Marcus allowed himself to remember. The cold, the fear, the absolute certainty that he'd reached the end. He remembered sitting in this barn with nothing, remembered Ranger pressing against him in the darkness, remembered thinking there was nothing left worth fighting for. His phone rang. Catherine. Merry early Christmas, she said warmly. I have your year-end financial reports ready whenever you want them. How are we doing? The refuge operated at a comfortable surplus. Your personal investments grew by 14%. And I've had inquiries from 3 other states about replicating the model. Marcus, you've built something remarkable. After hanging up, Marcus walked through the property. Lights glowed in the lodge windows. Music drifted from the common room where residents were decorating a Christmas tree. The barn, now converted into workshop space, housed woodworking and metalworking programs that gave veterans practical skills and therapeutic focus. Everything his grandfather had dreamed of made real. On Christmas Eve, Marcus held the annual refuge dinner. 40 people crammed into the lodge, residents, staff, volunteers, and a few community members who'd become supporters. The table groaned under the weight of food. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter. At midnight, Marcus raised a glass. A year ago, he said, and the room quieted, I had nothing. I'd been thrown out of the only home I knew. I was sleeping in this barn with my dog, wondering if I'd make it through winter. And then Ranger found something my grandfather left behind. Not just money, though that helped. He left me purpose, a reason to keep going, a way to turn my pain into something meaningful. He looked around the room, meeting eyes that reflected his own journey. Every person here knows what it's like to be told you're broken, to be discarded, to wonder if you matter. This place exists to say you do matter. You always did, and you always will. Glasses raised. Someone started singing. Ranger moved through the crowd, accepting pets and treats, his tail wagging contentedly. Later, after most people had gone to bed, Marcus sat by the fireplace with just Ranger and a cup of coffee. The dog rested his graying muzzle on Marcus's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. "You knew, didn't you?" Marcus whispered. "That first morning, when you started scratching at that wall, you knew something was there. Something that would save us both." Ranger's tail thumped once. "Good boy. Best damn partner I ever had." Marcus pulled out his grandfather's original letter, the one that had brought him to Montana. He'd read it hundreds of times, but tonight he noticed something new. A postscript he'd somehow missed before, written in fainter ink. "P.S. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I'm not really gone. I'm in every board of that barn, every beam of that lodge. I'm in the land and the sky and the purpose I left behind. Live well, kid. Make me proud. And take care of that dog. He's smarter than both of us combined." Marcus smiled through tears, pressing the letter to his chest. "I hope I'm making you proud, Grandpa," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying." Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, gentle flakes that caught the light from the windows and turned the valley into something magical. Inside, veterans slept peacefully, some for the first time in years. And in the converted barn, workshop tools waited for morning, ready to help broken things become whole again. Marcus stood and walked to the window, Ranger beside him. They looked out at the land Frank Webb had protected for so long, now fulfilling its true purpose. A place of healing, a place of hope, a place where broken soldiers came home and learned they'd never really been broken at all, just waiting for the right place to put their pieces back together. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," Marcus said softly. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing what I could be when I couldn't see it myself." Ranger barked once, soft and certain, as if Frank Webb had somehow answered through the dog who'd made it all possible. And in the warmth of the lodge, surrounded by lives being rebuilt, Marcus Webb finally felt what had eluded him for so long: home. Not a building or a place, but a purpose that made sense of all the pain. The fortune hidden for 73 years had done its work. But it wasn't the money that saved him. It was his grandfather's faith, Ranger's loyalty, and the discovery that sometimes the greatest wealth is knowing you matter, that your life has meaning, that you can transform your darkest moments into light for others stumbling through their own darkness. Outside, the Montana night embraced the refuge with gentle snow and starlight. Inside, Marcus Webb stood watch over the family he'd built from nothing, the veteran who'd been thrown away and came back richer than anyone could have imagined. Not because of gold or bonds, but because he'd learned the most valuable lesson of all. True wealth is measured in lives changed, in healing offered, in second chances given freely. And as Christmas morning dawned over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and hope, Marcus understood his grandfather's final gift hadn't been the $305 million. It had been the permission to start over, to build something that mattered, to become the man Frank Webb always knew he could be. The refuge stood strong against the winter, lights blazing warm in every window, a beacon for those still searching for home. And at its heart, a veteran and his dog, proving every single day that the broken can heal, the discarded can thrive, and love, whether from a grandfather, a loyal dog, or a community of wounded warriors, can work miracles that money never could. The end of Marcus's first chapter was really just the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have predicted. And somewhere, Frank Webb was smiling, knowing his final mission had been accomplished. Marcus Webb had found his way home. Spring arrived in Montana with the kind of promise that makes winter seem like a distant memory. The snow melted from the valley, revealing new grass and wildflowers that transformed the refuge into something even more beautiful than Marcus had imagined. The Webb Veterans Refuge had settled into a rhythm. 48 veterans had passed through in the first 6 months, and the success stories were mounting. A former Marine had opened a carpentry business. An Army sergeant was back in school, studying psychology so she could help others. 3 residents had decided to stay on permanently as staff, finding purpose in helping the next wave of arrivals. Marcus stood on the lodge porch one April morning, coffee in hand, watching rangers supervise a group of residents working in the new garden. The dog was 12 now, moving a bit slower, but still sharp as ever. still knowing exactly who needed his attention most. His phone rang. Catherine. Good morning. I have interesting news. Good interesting or complicated interesting? Both. Remember Agent Dawson from the DoD? The one who took the classified documents. He's requested a meeting. Says he has information about your grandfather you'll want to hear. Can you meet him in Helena tomorrow? Marcus hesitated. The past 6 months had been peaceful, purposeful. He wasn't sure he wanted to dig deeper into Frank Webb's mysterious life. But curiosity won. Yeah, I'll be there. The next day, Marcus drove to Helena with Ranger in the passenger seat. They met Dawson at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The agent looked older than Marcus remembered, more tired, but his handshake was firm. Thank you for coming. Dawson gestured to a corner booth. I wasn't sure you would. You said you had information about my grandfather. Dawson pulled out a thin folder, handling it carefully. After we recovered those documents from your property, we did a full review of Frank Webb's service record. Most of it is still classified, but there are parts one can share now. Parts one think you deserve to know. He opened the folder, revealing a black and white photograph. A younger Frank Webb stood with 4 other men in front of what looked like a government building. All wore suits. All had the bearing of military men, even in civilian clothes. Your grandfather wasn't just a guardian of assets, Dawson said quietly. He was part of an operation called Sentinel. 5 men, all former military intelligence, tasked with protecting critical resources during the early Cold War. Money? Yes, but also documents, technology, people who needed to disappear. Marcus stared at the photo. He never mentioned any of this. He couldn't. The operation was dissolved in 1971, but the work continued. Your grandfather was the last surviving member. He kept protecting everything until his death, waiting for someone trustworthy to pass it to. Dawson slid another document across the table. This is why I wanted to meet. We found something else in our archives. A sealed directive from 1982. Marcus read slowly, his pulse quickening with each line. The directive explained that if all Sentinel operatives died without completing their mission, a secondary protocol would activate. Hidden caches across the country would be revealed to designated heirs. Each cache contained instructions for the next phase. There's more. Marcus breathed. We think so. Your grandfather's cache wasn't the only one. But he was the only operative who successfully passed his mission to an heir. The others, their caches were lost when they died without telling anyone. How many caches? 5 total. We've located 2 others since reviewing the Sentinel files. Both are on properties that have changed hands multiple times. Current owners have no idea what's buried on their land. Marcus sat back, processing. Why are you telling me this? Dawson's expression was serious. Because Frank Webb's directive included a clause. If his heir proved worthy, and Marcus, you've proven that beyond any doubt, you'd be offered the chance to help locate and secure the remaining caches. To finish what the Sentinel operatives started. You want me to hunt for hidden Cold War treasure? I want you to help us close one of the last classified operations from that era. The other caches contain assets similar to what you found. Money that could fund programs like your refuge. Documents that could answer historical questions. Items that belong in proper hands, not lost forever. Ranger pressed against Marcus's leg under the table, sensing his tension. What if I say no? Then we keep searching on our own, and the caches might never be found. But your grandfather believed in you, Marcus. He thought you had the integrity and intelligence to handle this kind of responsibility. I'm inclined to agree with him. Marcus looked down at the photograph of his grandfather, young and serious, standing with men who trusted him with their lives and their secrets. I need time to think. Take what you need. But Marcus. Dawson leaned forward. Your grandfather spent 50 years protecting these secrets alone. You don't have to. We can help. We want to help. The drive back to the refuge was quiet. Marcus's mind churned with possibilities, questions, doubts. Ranger dozed beside him, occasionally opening one eye to check on him. When they arrived, Marcus found the lodge in controlled chaos. Jennifer Hart, the Marine who'd arrived last fall, was directing residents in setting up for a community barbecue they were hosting. She'd blossomed at the refuge, her natural leadership skills emerging as she healed. Boss, she called when she saw Marcus. Health inspector cleared our kitchen for the community meals program. We're officially licensed to serve the public. Marcus forced a smile. That's great, Hart. She studied him with the sharp eyes of someone who'd learned to read people in combat. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just got some news. Nothing bad. Just complicated. Want to talk about it? Marcus almost said no, then reconsidered. Hart had become his unofficial second-in-command, the person he trusted to keep the refuge running smoothly. If he was going to consider Dawson's offer, he needed people he could trust. Later, he said, after the barbecue. You, me, and Catherine. I might need some advice. That evening, after the community event wound down and the last guests departed, Marcus sat with Hart and Catherine in his small office. He explained everything: the Sentinel operation, the remaining caches, Dawson's offer. Hart listened intently, asking sharp questions. Catherine took notes, her legal mind already analyzing implications. When Marcus finished, Hart spoke first. What does your gut tell you? That Grandpa would want me to do this. That he spent his whole life protecting these things, and leaving it unfinished feels wrong. But, Catherine prompted, but I have responsibilities here. The refuge needs consistent leadership. I can't just disappear to chase Cold War secrets. Hart leaned back, considering. What if you didn't have to choose? The refuge runs pretty smoothly now. You've built systems, hired good people. I can handle day-to-day operations while you're gone. This doesn't have to be either or. Marcus looked at her. You do that. Marcus, you gave me my life back. Let me give you yours. Go finish your grandfather's work. We'll keep his legacy alive here. Catherine nodded. I agree. And from a legal standpoint, if you're working with federal authorities to secure historical assets, there could be benefits for the refuge. Government contracts, grants, recognition that would help us expand. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, Ranger was playing with two residents, his joy evident even in his aging movements. The refuge was thriving. Lives were being rebuilt. Everything Frank Webb had dreamed of was happening. But his grandfather had left one mission incomplete, and Marcus was the only person who could finish it. He turned back to Hart and Catherine. If I do this, and that's still if, I'm not doing it for money or recognition. The refuge has everything it needs. I'm doing it because Grandpa spent 50 years protecting these secrets, and they deserve to be properly secured. Then do it, Hart said firmly. Finish what Frank Webb started. We'll hold down the fort. That night, Marcus called Dawson. I'm in, he said without preamble. But I have conditions. Name them. Any assets recovered go into trust for veterans programs. Not just my refuge, programs nationwide. I don't want another personal fortune. I want to help as many people as possible. Agreed. What else? I bring my own team. People I trust. And Ranger comes with me. He found the first cache. He's part of this. Dawson chuckled. I wouldn't dream of leaving him behind. When can you start? Give me 2 weeks to prepare the refuge for my absence. You've got it. I'll send over the files on the first location. After hanging up, Marcus sat in the quiet office, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He'd been so focused on building the refuge, on staying in one place and helping people, that he'd almost forgotten he was capable of more. His grandfather had been a protector, a guardian, someone who moved through the world quietly doing essential work. Maybe it was time for Marcus to step into that role fully, not just as the director of a refuge, but as the heir to Frank Webb's real legacy, integrity, service, and the willingness to finish what others had started. Ranger padded into the office and rested his chin on Marcus's knee. Looks like we're going on an adventure, boy, Marcus murmured. One last mission for Grandpa. Ranger's tail wagged slowly, and in the dog's amber eyes, Marcus saw something that looked remarkably like approval. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Hart stepped seamlessly into full operational control of the refuge, handling everything from resident intake to staff meetings with military efficiency. Catherine prepared legal documents establishing the new trust for recovered assets. And Marcus studied the files Dawson sent, learning everything he could about the next cache location. It was in Pennsylvania, a 150-acre farm that had belonged to a Sentinel operative named Thomas Crawford. Crawford had died in 1998 without children, and the property had been sold 3 times since. The current owners, a retired couple named the Hendersons, had no idea their barn might be hiding something extraordinary. The challenge, Dawson explained over the phone, is that we can't just show up and start tearing apart their property. We need permission, which means we need to explain. And that means trusting strangers with classified information. Or we buy the property, Marcus said. A pause. That's Actually, not a bad idea. Do you have the liquid assets? Marcus laughed. Agent Dawson, I have more money than I know what to do with. If buying the farm protects the cash and the Hendersons' privacy, that's the play. 3 days later, Catherine called with news. The Hendersons are interested. They want to downsize anyway, move closer to their daughter. I made them an offer they'd be foolish to refuse. We should have the property in 2 weeks. How much? Does it matter? Marcus smiled. No, I guess it doesn't. On a warm May morning, Marcus loaded his truck with supplies for an extended trip. Ranger hopped into the passenger seat, looking excited for the first time in weeks. The old dog knew something was happening, and his tail hadn't stopped wagging since Marcus started packing. Hart walked out to see them off, along with a dozen residents who'd formed an impromptu send-off committee. You come back safe, Hart said, gripping Marcus's hand. And bring us back a good story. That's the plan. Hey, boss. One of the newer residents, a young Army vet named Miller, stepped forward. I just wanted to say, what you built here, what you're doing for us. Your grandpa would be proud. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Thanks, Miller. Take care of each other while I'm gone. Always do. The drive east took 3 days. Marcus kept to back roads, stopping at small motels that accepted dogs without question. Ranger seemed to enjoy the adventure, his nose pressed to the window as new landscapes rolled past. They crossed from Montana to North Dakota, then Minnesota, Wisconsin, and finally Pennsylvania. The landscape transformed from open plains to rolling hills to dense forests. It was beautiful country, different from Montana, but no less striking. The Henderson farm sat in rural Pennsylvania, outside a town called Millbrook. When Marcus pulled up the long driveway, he found exactly what the files had described. A classic American farm with a white house, a red barn, and fields that stretched toward distant tree lines. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and a warm smile, met him on the porch. Mr. Webb, we weren't expecting you until next week. I hope that's all right. The weather was good for driving, so I pushed through. Of course, of course. And who's this handsome boy? She crouched to pet Ranger, who accepted the attention graciously. This is Ranger. He's my partner in all this. A working dog, Mr. Henderson said, emerging from the house. He was tall, weathered, with the bearing of a man who'd spent his life working the land. I can tell by the way he carries himself. Military. Yes, sir. We both served. Mr. Henderson's expression softened. Thank you for your service. Both of you. He shook Marcus's hand firmly. Now, Catherine told us you're interested in the property for a veterans program. That true. Marcus chose his words carefully. It's complicated. The property has historical significance I didn't know about until recently. My grandfather worked with the man who used to own this farm, and there may be items here that need to be properly documented and preserved. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up. Oh, is this about Thomas? We always wondered about him. The neighbors said he was government, very secretive. Never talked about his past. That's him. Well, Mr. Henderson said, the property's yours if you want it. We're ready to move to our daughter's place. But we'd like to hear the whole story someday. Thomas Crawford was a mystery, and mysteries should be solved. I promise to tell you everything I can, once I know it myself. They spent the afternoon touring the property. The house was well maintained, the fields healthy. But the barn was what interested Marcus. It was old, possibly original to the property, with thick beams and a loft that smelled of hay and age. Ranger entered first, nose working. He circled the space slowly, methodically, then stopped at the northwest corner. His body went rigid. His ears shot forward. Here we go, Marcus murmured. He examined the floor where Ranger stood. Wood planks, ancient and worn, but one section looked different. Newer nails, different spacing. Marcus pulled out the files Dawson had sent, comparing them to what he saw. The hidden entrance was supposed to be under a false floor panel, accessible only if you knew where to look. He pressed his hand against different boards, feeling for the mechanism his grandfather's notes had described. On the 7th try, something clicked. A section of floor rose slightly, revealing a metal handle. Marcus's heart pounded as he pulled. The panel lifted, revealing a steel hatch beneath. And on that hatch, a symbol he recognized from his grandfather's journals, the Sentinel mark. We found it. Boy, Marcus whispered. Ranger barked once, proud. The hatch required a key Marcus didn't have. He photographed it and sent the image to Dawson, who called back within minutes. That's it. That's Crawford's cash. Don't open it yet. I need to send a team to help document everything. Can you wait 48 hours? We've waited 70 years. 2 more days won't hurt. Those 2 days were tense. Marcus stayed in the farmhouse, which the Hendersons had left fully furnished for his use. He walked the property with Ranger, imagining Thomas Crawford living here alone, protecting secrets no one knew about. It must have been lonely. His grandfather at least had family nearby, a community that knew him even if they didn't know everything about him. Crawford had died alone in this house. His mission unfinished, his sacrifice unrecognized. On the 3rd morning, 3 black SUVs rolled up the driveway. Dawson emerged from the first one, along with a team of specialists carrying equipment that looked more archaeological than military. Let's see what Thomas Crawford left behind, Dawson said. It took them 6 hours to open the hatch safely and catalog the contents. Marcus stood back, letting the specialists work, but watching everything carefully. Ranger sat beside him, calm but alert. When they finally lifted the first container out, Marcus felt a chill. It was identical to the ones his grandfather had hidden. Same construction, same markings, same sense of weight and importance. Inside was gold. Not as much as Frank Webb's cash, but substantial, enough that Dawson whistled softly when he saw it. Conservative estimate? $70 million in current value. But it was the second container that made everyone pause. Documents, carefully preserved, detailing operations that had never been declassified. And a personal journal, leather-bound like Frank Webb's, with Thomas Crawford's name embossed on the cover. Dawson handled it reverently. This is going to rewrite some history. Can I read it? Marcus asked. Before it gets classified again? Dawson considered, then nodded. You've earned that right. That night, alone in the farmhouse with only Ranger for company, Marcus read Thomas Crawford's journal by lamplight. The entries were sparse, matter of fact, but the loneliness bled through every page. August 1971. The operation is officially dissolved. But the mission remains. Frank called today. He's still protecting his cash. I'll protect mine. Somebody has to. December 1982. Frank sent a letter. His grandson is showing promise. Smart kid, military family. Frank thinks the boy might be worthy someday. I hope Frank's right. One of us needs to pass this on successfully. January 1998. I'm sick. Doctors say I have maybe 6 months. Frank's grandson is in the army now, serving overseas. Frank is proud, but worried. I wish I had someone to pass this to. Wish I'd gotten married, had kids. But the mission always came first. Maybe that was a mistake. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before Crawford's death. I'm sealing the cash permanently. If no one finds it, so be it. I did my duty. Frank, if you're reading this somehow, I hope your plan works. I hope your grandson is everything you believe he is. Someone needs to finish what we started. Someone needs to prove that what we did mattered. Marcus closed the journal, emotion thick in his throat. Crawford had died alone, believing his sacrifice would be forgotten. But it wouldn't be. Marcus would make sure of that. The next morning, he approached Dawson with a proposal. The assets from this cash, all of them, I want them to go into a trust honoring the Sentinel operatives. Frank Webb, Thomas Crawford, and the others. Fund programs in their names. Scholarships, veterans services, historical preservation. Let their sacrifice mean something. Dawson extended his hand. I'll make it happen personally. And I want to buy this property permanently. Turn it into a second refuge. The Thomas Crawford House. For veterans who need what he never had. Community, purpose, recognition. You're going to run 2 refuges? Marcus smiled. I'm going to build a network. Frank Webb's vision was just the beginning. There are veterans all over this country who need what these men protected. It's time to use these resources the way they were meant to be used. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with Catherine and Hart to establish the Thomas Crawford House. The Hendersons agreed to stay on temporarily as caretakers while the property was renovated. Dawson's team secured the cash, documented everything, and began the legal process of transferring assets into the Sentinel Legacy Trust. But it was something else that made Marcus realize the scope of what they'd stumbled into. Dawson called late one night, voice tight with urgency. We found something in Crawford's documents. A map. It shows all 5 cache locations. Marcus sat up straight. All of them, including 2 we hadn't located yet. Marcus, we can finish this. We can secure everything the Sentinel operatives protected. But it's going to take time, resources, and someone those operators would have trusted leading the effort. Where are the other caches? Oregon and Louisiana, both on properties that have been developed. This is going to be complicated. Marcus looked at Ranger, sleeping peacefully by the fireplace. Looked at the journal on his desk, filled with Crawford's lonely entries. Looked out the window at the farm that would become a sanctuary for veterans who'd served their country and needed a place to heal. Then let's get complicated, Marcus said. These men gave their lives to this mission. The least we can do is finish it. And so began the next chapter of Marcus Webb's unexpected journey. From a broken veteran with nothing, to the heir of a fortune, to the guardian of secrets that stretched across decades and states. But more than that, he became the bridge between past and present, honoring the sacrifices of men like his grandfather and Thomas Crawford by transforming their hidden wealth into visible, tangible good. The Sentinel operatives had protected these assets for 50 years, waiting for someone worthy to discover them. They'd chosen wisely, because Marcus Webb wasn't just discovering treasure. He was discovering purpose, legacy, and the profound truth that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the responsibility to do something meaningful with it. As spring turned to summer, Marcus stood on the porch of the Thomas Crawford house, Ranger beside him, looking out over Pennsylvania farmland that held secrets no one had suspected. And he understood, finally, what his grandfather had been trying to tell him all along. You're not broken. You're being forged. And when the forging is done, you'll be strong enough to carry not just your own weight, but the weight of a mission that matters. 2 down, Marcus told Ranger quietly. 3 to go. Ranger's tail thumped once against the porch boards, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, not threatening, but promising. The kind of storm that clears the air and makes everything that follows feel new. Marcus smiled and walked back inside, ready for whatever came next. The mission was far from over. But for the first time in his life, Marcus Webb was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And that, more than any fortune, was worth everything.